It was all over. The end was nigh. From the perspective of people on the ground, an enormous mass filled the sky, blotting out the sunlight. Around the world, people caught only glimpses, horrifying fragments of a much larger whole. A jagged tooth, larger than any mountain, tentacles writhing, shifting, each one wider than entire cities. The view from space was no less terrifying. Spied by a Foundation probe, the enormous creature bigger than the Earth itself emerged into existence. SCP-2440, the Sealed King, was free. He'd been awaiting this day for millennia, gradually infecting the minds of human beings throughout the ages. The only hindrance was the tireless work of the SCP Foundation. They had to carefully control the spread of any information about SCP-2440 in order to stop his return. And yet, they'd failed. Suddenly, something ripped across the sky, a tail of fire arcing out behind it as it flew upwards towards the colossal monstrosity emerging out in space. It looked like a bright, burning fireball to all the onlookers cowering in the streets below. It was dwarfed in scale by the enormity of the Sealed King, only appearing to get smaller and smaller by comparison the further it flew. This wasn't a missile, nor a conventional weapon of any kind. It was humanity's last hope, a guardian angel. SCP-001 streaked through the air, burning brighter than ever before, its flaming sword poised ready to strike as it homed in on its target. It parted clouds as it climbed higher, the usual cold of moisture in the upper atmosphere turning to steam seconds before the Gate Guardian even passed by. The heat of its flames needed to be hot enough to kill SCP-2440, putting enough power behind its strike to fell one of the few creatures that could withstand the Guardian's burning blade. There would only be one shot at this. Memetic infections had been spreading like wildfire. Whenever the SCP Foundation encountered information about SCP-2440, just as they had managed to suppress it, a new case would pop up somewhere else. Underground cults were uncovered preaching the so-called benevolence of Ziltla on one side of the world. Just as Foundation teams moved in, dosing members with amnestics to erase all memory of the Sealed King's false promises, a new threat would emerge. This time it wasn't a temple or a gathering, it was a forum, created anonymously on the deep web halfway across the globe, filled with cryptic discussions and coded rituals, each post aimed at one goal, bringing about the return of SCP-2440. There was only one explanation. There had to have been some kind of leak within the Foundation, and it needed to be plugged. One of the agents worked on containing information about SCP-2440 before it created a potential problem. Meanwhile, another unit was tasked to come up with a solution in the event the spread of hazardous knowledge could not be contained. SCP-2440 was a memetic parasite, only capable of manifesting if enough people became aware of his existence. The more people learned about him, the stronger he became. And in the event that the Sealed King was able to fully manifest in reality, then it would cause an XK class end-of-the-world scenario. In order to protect against that outcome, the Foundation needed to better understand SCP-2440. They could control the spread of information about him within their own organization through the administering of amnestics. But if they weren't able to stop the Sealed King from manifesting, then they needed a way to fight him. They knew he was considered to be one of the old gods. This was a group of mostly malevolent entities from the beginning of creation, who disregarded all forms of life and were responsible for some of the numerous anomalies the Foundation had encountered and contained over the years. And it was exactly these anomalies that the Foundation would be looking to for help now. The Gate Guardian departed the Earth, breaking through the outer atmosphere, the airless vacuum of space unable to stop its fiery body and weapon from burning. Though it was moving far faster than any human could perceive, these nanoseconds were the longest it had ever left its post for, leaving the gate with no one to defend it, but it was necessary. An attack on reality would threaten the safety of the paradise that lay beyond the gate. SCP-001 was sworn to protect that plane, no matter the cost. As it flew through the stars, shapes clawed out of the dark, parting the fabric between reality and non-existence, allowing SCP-2440 to arrive. But the Gate Guardian didn't fly straight for the Sealed King. Instead, it traveled over 90 million miles from Earth, heading right towards the burning ball of gases that lit the side of the tiny blue planet facing it. Even at its colossal height, the Gate Guardian was so small when compared to the enormity of the sun. Sensing the looming form of the Sealed King moving towards the Earth, SCP-001 raised its flaming sword, its blade pointed towards the surface of the sun. Searing flames were pulled into the weapon, absorbed and added to its already formidable fire. The sword was often said to rival the burning of the sun itself, though never caused any damage to the area surrounding it, unless SCP-001 wielded it in a retaliatory attack. But being as hot as the sun wouldn't be enough to drive the Sealed King back. The Gate Guardian needed its sword to be hot enough to erase SCP-2440 from existence. The investigation into the leaking of information about the Sealed King had gone worse than anyone could have foreseen. An entire cult of people infected by knowledge of Euclid managed to spread the word to almost 1,500 people, enough for many of them to begin hearing SCP-2440's commands in their minds. The entity had convinced its new followers that it was the only true loving God, that humanity and all creatures beneath him would bask in the adoration of the Sealed King if he was able to return. The Foundation knew the truth, though. SCP-2440 had manifested once before, and his disregard for human life was apparent when he tried to destroy the world. Agents were trying to gather up as many of the cultists as they could and convince them of the truth, but many wouldn't listen. Those that did refused to believe what they thought were the words of false prophets. Others ran from the Foundation, spreading the word to anyone and everyone that they saw. It didn't matter if people believed or even if they devoted themselves to Euclid. Just making them know about him was enough. And if that wasn't enough to contend with, the rest of the Foundation had difficulty finding a suitable protector in the event that SCP-2440 arrived. They had realized quickly, as more information about him spread, that the Sealed King would be getting more powerful. This meant that any anomaly they enlisted to help could potentially fall under SCP-2440's control, if the Foundation told them what they were up against. SCP-343 was offered the job, but he declined, saying that he couldn't be bothered to get involved. It was about time humanity looked after itself instead of calling on him all the time. SCP-682 could never be reasoned with, and while it hated all forms of life, it would probably welcome the destruction of humanity. The Foundation needed someone pure, incorruptible, and most of all, someone they could convince to be on their side, an anomaly whose goals would require the world to stay intact. Then someone suggested SCP-001. It made sense. The Gate Guardian existed to protect the entrance to paradise, and had wrought massive amounts of destruction to anyone that had attempted to attack it. The problem was, the Foundation couldn't just wait for Euclid to arrive and launch a strike at the Guardian. Too many would die before then, unless they could convince SCP-001 that the attack had already happened. In a bold move, the O5 Council cleared the Foundation to release all information about SCP-2440 among themselves and the public. TV channels, news websites, social media platforms were flooded with information about the Sealed King. Their goal was to infect between 100,000 to 1 million people with the memetic information to intentionally cause SCP-2440 to manifest. Sure enough, it worked, and Euclid began to emerge. But while they'd be bringing about his arrival, the Foundation were ready to roll out the welcome wagon. They'd approach the Gate Guardian, presenting it with a single word, the same command that it had spoken to a lone physicist many years ago. Prepare. And just as they'd hoped, SCP-001 interpreted the information about SCP-2440 becoming known as a preemptive attack, and one that threatened its mission. The Guardian had no choice but to fight back, soaring up from its post to meet the Sealed King as he arrived. Fire pulled directly from the sun, SCP-001 shot across space, moving so fast it could barely be seen by the advanced telescopes aboard the Foundation's satellites. Though SCP-2440 wasn't bound by the same rules as mortals, reality could be anything he wanted it to, and as soon as he arrived, he allowed himself to move as fast as the Guardian. But he couldn't prepare for the first sword strike. The searing heat burned as SCP-2440 tried to block the oncoming attack, the molecules of his physical form burning so hot that they disintegrated entirely on contact. He evaded each swing, trying to move space and alter the flow of time around them both to prepare the Gate Guardian from landing another attack. Even then, he was barely evading. SCP-001 was still just as fast as ever. The Gate Guardian's sword was burning hot enough to cleave SCP-2440 out of existence itself, like cutting the mold from a piece of fruit. Each swing of the fiery blade landed with the searing scorch of a supernova. In several seconds, the Sealed King would be no more, not just driven out of this universe, but removed from existence entirely. With his defeat imminent, there was only one move left. The mold might be cut away, but it could still spread, invisible, yet ever present. With the last fading fragment of his power, SCP-2440 bent reality to his whims. It was so tiny, so seemingly inconsequential, that it managed to slip by SCP-001 and the SCP Foundation undetected. In an instant, the change was made, and Zyotla was pleased. He stopped trying to deflect the Gate Guardian's strikes, instead lowering his guard and opening himself up for the final blow. The Guardian's sword plunged into the heart of the Sealed King, causing him to erupt in a cosmic fireball that burst across the stars. From Earth, the force of the explosion caused huge tidal waves in the ocean, shattered windows in major cities, and a deafening crack louder than any thunderstorm in history was heard by every living person. Looking into the sky, even from the dark side of the Earth facing away from the sun, people saw something huge, a raging inferno high above them, like a second sun had been ignited. But the Foundation started receiving alerts from their deep space probes. The heat from the resultant explosion was heading towards Earth. The readings were astronomically high, and panic set in. The end of the world scenario had not been averted. It had just changed. In moments, it would incinerate the planet, burning the atmosphere away and boiling the oceans, after it immolated every animal, every plant, every building, and every last human being. There was nothing anyone could do to stop the shockwave of fire rippling across space. Nothing any mortal could do, at least. As the Foundation and the world watched the oncoming wall of flames, it suddenly receded, as if being pulled back faster than it was approaching. The fire was sucked away in a giant vortex. SCP-001's sword was being held aloft, the supernova it had created being drawn back into the blade, absorbed into the Guardian's weapon, until the flames were gone. They were now part of the anomalous entity. In the blink of an eye, SCP-001 had vanished from out in space. Having returned to its post, it resumed its watch, as vigilant as ever in protecting the entryway to paradise. It had no idea it had failed in its mission, though. The change the Sealed King made would stay small and undetected, but it set in, the mold taking root in reality. His godlike powers had never really been his true strength. The real power had always been his influence over the minds of mortals. As long as some scrap of information about him survived, SCP-2440 would live on, and possibly even return to reality again one day, this time to subjugate it once and for all. Before the Gate Guardian had landed the killing strike, the Sealed King had managed to hide details about himself in the minds of a few mortals. Not all of them understood. Many didn't even know they'd been chosen. But some did, realizing what they had to do. They labored in the dark. Those who'd received the slivers of knowledge about Zyotla began to believe it. What had once seemed like fiction to them began to feel like it had happened for real. The Foundation and the Gate Guardian had struck the Sealed King down, and his new believers sought to restore him. Maybe they started to tell the story of SCP-2440's confrontation with SCP-001. If enough people heard it, learned about the Sealed King, then he could rise again. Maybe some of them even turn it into a YouTube video. Now check out what if SCP-001 Gate Guardian battled SCP-343 God, and insane SCP-001 fight Gate Guardian vs. Scarlet King for more.